already seeing an unprecedented push for anti-trans legislation this year alone. Axios reports that Republicans in at least 25 states are moving forward with over 60 bills targeting trans youth specifically. The bills would limit access to school sports and gender-affirming health care. LGBTQ advocates say the bills are discriminatory and transphobic and is triggered in part by backlash to President Biden's election victory. So Orion Rumler has been following this story and is joining us now. You write for Axios. So your story has a really sort of simple graph that tells the tale, often in pictures. And you see sort of, I'm just looking over here, you see 2018, 2019, and then 2020, the bills jump up, and then 2021 the bills jump up even more. And so I want to ask you, what is happening between 2020 and 2021? Is this just sort of a continuation of the type of legislation that we had been seeing before, or are there differences between say 2020 and 2021?
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Vlad. So some of these bills we did see Republicans pushing for last year, and one of the changes has been that some of these state legislatures paused during the coronavirus and then went back to pushing these bills this year. But something else that's changed is President Biden's election and his administration. And LGBTQ advocates are saying that some of the pushback that is fueling these bills are some of the actions that Biden's taken, such as reversing President Trump's military ban for transgender people, pausing the HHS rule that would allow for discrimination for LGBTQ people. And the Biden administration also left a lawsuit that the Trump administration actually joined against the transgender athletes that was brought forth by 3 high school students in Connecticut.
So many of these bills, Orion, center around transgender student athletes. What's the argument for proponents of the bill which attempt to exclude trans youth from teams that align with their gender identity? And what evidence do they have, if any, to support their claims? I note that Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota has just recently introduced a bill.
Yes, exactly. Mississippi and South Dakota are the 2 states that look like they're going to pass these bills into law very soon. Both Republican governors have said that they plan to sign these bills. And the argument that lawmakers are bringing to this is that transgender inclusion in sports would harm women's equality, would harm equality for girls. But I would note that as the Associated Press has reported, they talked to over 24 lawmakers, and the majority of them failed to bring evidence to actually find examples within their state to say this has been a problem. We found students who say this has been a problem. That's not to say there is zero evidence. As the lawsuit that I mentioned earlier, those 3 Connecticut high school runners said they were denied scholarship opportunities based on trans inclusion in sports.
So here's the thing. Idaho also passed a similar law aimed at restricting the rights of transgender student athletes. That happened last year. You know, these laws are going to be challenged. Maybe some of them will be sort of thrown out. But I'm wondering if they're thrown out or they don't pass, is the damage already done?
That's a really good point, Anne-Marie, and that's something that LGBT advocates have actually been saying. Jillian Brandstetter with the National Women's Law Center told me that these bills could still harm transgender kids even if they are not passed. The way she put it to me is that these bills to LGBT advocates are spreading falsehoods about trans kids that could negatively affect their lives at school, and it could negatively affect their mental health. And we do have studies that have shown that transgender kids are more susceptible to depression, to thoughts of suicide, to mental health issues. And the ways to combat those mental health issues are greater acceptance, are being able to have a normal childhood to participate in things like sport.
So, Orion, in your report, you write that this culture war seems to be a winning issue for Republicans. How are they using this as a political issue to fire up the base? And, you know, when you hear some of the language that's used around this issue, specifically from opponents of it, it makes it seem as if, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of kids. What are the numbers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Republicans are bringing this up in legislation such as the Equality Act, that the idea of transgender students participating in athletics was something that was brought up frequently by lawmakers like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene within this legislation, saying that the Equality Act would not be an Equality Act because of transgender inclusion. And what you mentioned about the number of transgender people that would be affected by laws like this is actually an interesting conversation I had with Dan Cox from the AEI Survey Center on American Life from the quote you put up, that these bills would not affect a lot of Americans. It would affect a very small number of Americans, but it does seem to be an issue that that gets Republicans more fired up, more than Democrats.
So President Biden reversed the Trump administration's transgender military ban within days of his inauguration. He also nominated Dr. Rachel Levine to be Assistant Secretary of Health. If she's approved, she will be the first openly transgender Senate-confirmed federal official in U.S. history, from Pennsylvania, I might add. Do you expect the volume of bills to dramatically increase because of what's happening at the federal level? Is this sort of a reaction to that? And then what are advocates saying and doing? And what are they saying we should watch for in the next few months?
The advocates are saying that Biden's actions are what is partially driving these bills, although I would already say the momentum at the state level does already seem to be there. And advocates are saying that in the next 2 months, the number of bills coming out at the state level could define transgender justice and transgender rights for the next decade or so. That's what the ACLU's chief Strangio said. But the actions that Biden has taken, like what you mentioned for the military ban, these are things that advocates are saying are fueling this push and could build it even further.
Really interesting reporting. Orion Rumler, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.